So this is organized just as sort of a wrap-up panel under the title, I think it was cleverly dubbed, "What the Hell Do We Do Now?" Where we're going to try to take some of these issues that we've touched on over the course of 3 days and look at where do we want to go from here. Sitting on the panel, although I'm sure we'll solicit other questions and thoughts from the audience, are Bob Ciotti, Paul Dyke, Scott Schultz, and Ronald Loughton. Question number one, panelists, it goes back to my presentation from this morning. Although many users access part of the OFED stack, very few of them, according to our research, name OFED as part of their software stack. How important is it, in your estimation, to drive conscious usage of OFED versus unconscious usage of OFED? If they're using it and don't realize they're using it, does that matter?
Do we have a mic?
So obviously this is very important, right? So I could say we can move on to the next question. But perhaps you should all give them free stickers that say, you know, OFED inside.
So we don't. So my name is Paul. I'm from Microsoft. We don't use OFED as it comes from the internet, right? We get our distribution from Mellanox, and we, in our product that we market and sell that uses InfiniBand, we don't mention OFED, right? That's not a selling point. So, you know, from our perspective, it's not that important.
Well, so I think in general, people that we would think, well, we use InfiniBand, and oh yeah, there's the software open, and we know it's OFED, but and if we're doing the builds, that's what's known. But if we look at our user community, they don't know. They don't know about OFED unless they had a specific development activity that they're engaging at a pretty low level.
Well, and Bob, you mentioned, okay, we think we're using InfiniBand. Is OFED still linked to InfiniBand in your mind?
Oh, in my mind, yes, but I just, you know, when we would speak to management or other people about, you know, what we're using, they think we're using InfiniBand, right? And that's about the, it's an InfiniBand network, and so that's, you know, when you transition to Ethernet and you want to expand the impact that OFED, you know, potentially can have, then that differentiation becomes important. You need to know, oh, this is the software components, you know, that enable RDMA, and you know, you're going to need to know that and have that and use that.
So maybe it doesn't matter now, but if you're going to expand the use of OFED beyond just as part of the InfiniBand software stack, then it's got to have awareness of its own.
I think so.
Scott, did you want to comment on that?
I agree totally with that statement.
Always smart to agree with the big customer with the budget. Second question that I had pre-prepared. In that case, so considering some of the other new technology that we're looking forward to, what more does OFED need in order to play a role in new parallel computing paradigms, from many-core through to accelerators of different types? AMD's got to have a comment on that, right? You can't punt that one. Here, give me the mic.
I'm going to say something.
Well, it's a question of what do I say now and what can I say for the future, right? But I think if we take a look at processor technology, GPU technology, and kind of the fundamental elements of kind of what the big customers are looking for in high-performance computing, OFED is going to become very relevant, and maybe even more relevant as next-generation architectures evolve, right? So, you know, we've all heard Poole talk about, you know, his 3D stack technology type architectures, and all of that is going to evolve into an escalation or elevation of the network fabric becoming very close to the processor, becoming a very, you know, number one, if not a first-class citizen. It's going to be the first-class citizen, and so, and would you like to further comment?
Do you
on
have
that?
something beyond an interjection that would
No, I'll let you finish.
provide
your
color
sentence.
commentary?
Yeah, well, I mean, as the future roadmaps, which I can't really discuss here, I see all of this as being very relevant and very, very true, right? And so, Intel, AMD, the technology, the hardware companies absolutely need to make not only OFED, but the entire software stack, the first class, the first thing that you think about. It's not just the underlying hardware.
You won't comment on future architecture, so I will as an analyst. You've got NVIDIA making a clear statement that they think there will be supercomputers based on ARM, which meanwhile AMD is already implementing with Fusion I/O. Intel's got many integrated core on its roadmap. Does that imply any kind of necessary adaptation of OFED going forward?
If you take a look at the very common denominator between all of that, ARM, Intel's roadmap, NVIDIA architecture, the one thing that we have to all pay attention to is the software, because without the software, none of this becomes relevant, right? So even with ARM has a very long, hard road ahead to move the ISVs, to move the porting. It's a software ecosystem challenge, and I think the hardware companies get it. They get it now, and I think you're going to see that, for the large part, a majority of the hardware companies' resources are going to be focused on the software. So OFED doesn't become any less relevant. If anything, it becomes more relevant.
All right. Ronald, we let him finish his sentence and then gave him 2 or 3 more besides. Software.
Okay, I'm not going to talk about software. I think we heard enough on that topic. So what does this all mean? I certainly agree that the networking will take a much more important role in the systems as it has in the past, right? The focus is really moving away from the compute and more to the data. We will need to integrate the networking much closer to where the action is, and the action is in the data. And we will get much tighter integration of the NICs to something that's very close to the memory. And yeah, there will be a compute core there, or there will be a GPU there, or some other form of accelerator, or perhaps an FPGA. But the point is integration. Now, I can recommend people to take a look at a couple of platforms that are integrating what people call microservers. And when you look at that, you see that inevitably they have a Ethernet core or an Ethernet macro directly on chip, right? So you've got, if you want to build a system, you get this chip, you add some DRAM, you add the wires to your switch, and you're good to go, right? Now, the point is that these people, these companies that decide to implement the networking, they put on the following types of interfaces, right? They put on Ethernet, they put on SATA, they put on Rapid I/O. We heard about that a couple of times. But IB, there's no IB on those things, right? So if you say the future of OFED, you have to realize that due to the need for tight integration, the world is moving to Ethernet, right? And Ethernet is growing up with the new standards to address all of the issues that IB has solved quite well.
Our data not necessarily showing all of HPC moving to Ethernet, but nevertheless Ethernet.
The choice of IB is for one reason only. It is the cheapest and the fastest thing around today. I guarantee there's no customer loyalty in HPC. If next year Ethernet is half cost of IB, all of them will use Ethernet.
Yeah, we've done loyalty studies and found that there is very little loyalty to technologies, right, or brands.
So I actually have a question for you, which is that next time when you do the analysis, I would love to see, when you break down IB versus Ethernet, that within Ethernet you break down the old Ethernet the good old Ethernet, and the new versions that people call SDB.
Yeah, we have it broken down by speed. It's difficult to get a survey breakdown beyond
I
that.
understand that. That's why I didn't complain. I just asked, can you please do this in the future?
Well,
I think
IBM's a
this
very
is
good
really,
client, so
really-
I'll send a proposal over for the study.
It's really, really important to do that.
Speaking of new architectures, watch what we're going to do here. The microphone goes into the cloud, and then it gets downloaded over here to Microsoft, just like that.
So I discussed this with my colleague, and he had a few observations on acceleration and kind of the impact that it had on the PCI bus in particular. And I don't know, Eric, if you wanted to elaborate on that or not. I know we heard a couple of presentations this morning on GPUs. The principal, I think, accelerator that he was concerned about, and how we can have this fast interconnect, but in the end, if the PCI bus is impacted such that you can't get the bandwidth anyway, it's almost, it negates one of the rationales for having InfiniBand in the first place. Is that fairly accurate? Yeah. So I guess that's the issue. What the solution is, I don't know. But did you want to add more? No? Okay.
Let's see if Bob wants to add more.
Sure. So the question relative to OFED and compute paradigms and how to continue acceptance, I mean, basically you have an upper layer of software that you want to get down to some hardware, and you're going to transition through OFED. That may help to save money because it's already been developed off existing software that's there, and it might speed the time to market for lots of companies to start to play in this space. As an example of what's important right now, it's this interface over PCI, right? NHPC, that's where accelerators are going to sit. And so talked a little bit to Paul earlier about, well, what kind of crazy stuff could interface between OFED and PCI? Verbs, is there a way to do within node transfers or two memories on two GPUs on a system, some of the things that NVIDIA was looking at inventing and potentially doing in a proprietary way? Is there an open way that we can facilitate an OFED RDMA approach?
AMD Fusion and Intel Mic don't necessarily imply PCI Express, do they?
Yeah, this is just the way that they're doing it openly today. There's a lot of different ways to do it. So on-die, proprietary interconnects, different modes of PCI that are different than what we think of as PCI, so, and on. So,
I'm interested in that a couple times it's still come up here that OFED is really still thought of as an InfiniBand, part of InfiniBand software stack. What partnerships do you think would be most important in supporting a broader adoption of OFED into some of these other areas? To the cloud.
To the cloud. Hey, where'd my data go?
I don't know.
So reread the question just so I make sure I
What
answer.
partnerships would be most important in supporting broader adoption of OFED?
There you go. So I think we have done a fantastic job of including the partnerships which originally founded Open Fabrics, right? The RDMA technology companies, the InfiniBand companies. But I think it's more relevant to be able to get some more proactive participation from, let's say, the OEMs, and those partnerships to help drive the Open Fabrics and the OFED messaging into the enterprise data center, right, is going to come from the from the OEMs to the customers. So that's one of the areas or the relationships that I'd like to see us work on in the following, next 12 months.
So a somewhat related answer, not exactly going into your question, is There's another thing that is happening, which is that for people who want to build embedded systems that need very tight integration, doing an ASIC yourself these days is really, really expensive. So there's many companies that are going to use, and some of them are doing this already, FPGAs to build their systems, right? So if you want to extend OFED to, you know, more widespread use, I suggest that you invest quite seriously into making sure that you can get a OFED-enabled networking core available on the popular FPGA platforms. Because this is where startup companies are making the designs of the future today.
Ronald, is that different from Polybus or somebody like that?
From what?
Polybus.
Polybus.
I don't even know what it is. Don't know what it is.
They're an FPGA IP vendor, and I was wondering if you had a different model in mind, or if that would be sufficient.
I'm not familiar with Polybus either.
I don't know Polybus, but all I'm saying is that you have to make sure that when you look at, say, you put yourself in the shoes of, you know, a small company or startup company that says, I have a great idea, I want to build, you know, some kind of an embedded thing. I mean, take some of the examples of what we saw from Mercury, and say, I want to build something, it has to be an FPGA, and you start shopping for, I don't want to, you know, write all the code myself, the VHDL from scratch. I'm going to shop for cores, right? I have my CPU, I have my accelerator, my FFT, whatever you're doing, and a networking core. Can they get an IB core that has the complete OFED stack with it? Is this advertised? Where do people find this? Can they get this for good old Ethernet? Can they get this for the new version of Ethernet, DCB, with the OFED stack? So that's a complete package. And that people just say, oh yeah, I know where to get this, and I'm done. Let's move on to the next problem.
It turns out that's exactly what Polybus provides.
Okay.
They may not be well known.
Never.
And they are targeted at the space exactly.
So, FPGA vendors, one idea. Other concepts of partnerships? Partnerships. You're not on.
Was that your question? I wasn't.
No, if FPGAs were mentioned over here, I'm going back to my basic question, what partnerships would be most important in supporting broader adoption of OFED?
Well, I think that's probably the markets where you want low latency connections to various components with little overhead. And so autonomous transfers, one-sided transfers, the types of systems that you're deploying that would require that. Because we're going to go, if it's required, we're going to invent something to make that hardware capability available at some software level, and those would be places to go work.
Paul, if there's one company I would name that's being excellent at driving partnerships, it would probably be Microsoft. What are your thoughts on this? The microphone stands by you there.
So I guess a good out-of-the-box experience, you know, for whatever, you know, however you consume InfiniBand, right? Whether it's in Linux or Windows, you get that with almost any other piece of hardware. Maybe it's a little less so in the Linux world. Certainly in the Windows world, you get, you know, a great out-of-the-box experience usually. So I think that's, you know, making sure that we do a good job at getting this. It's in the Linux distributions, right? It is in some form. It's just not called OFED. Maybe it should be called OFED because it's all based on the work I think done here, mostly.
Brings us back around to the first question.
Yeah.
If they're using it, does it matter if they know they're using it?
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that. I mean, from my perspective, it doesn't matter. I just want a high quality stack, whether it's called OFED or not, and whether people here get credit or not. It doesn't matter to me, but does it matter to you? That's the question.
The last question before we wrap up the panel and the entire workshop, Jim has done an excellent job of capturing some of these major feedback areas that he's promised we're not going to be looking at this same list again a year from now, which if we move it back into February, has actually got only 10 months. So the question is, between now and next year's conference, what is the top thing that you think needs to be fixed or addressed in OFED, either from this list or a write-in vote of one of your own? If you had to pick one, tell me what's the one thing that needs to be fixed or addressed in OFED?
So I'll start. It seems I'm holding the mic. How about better sockets performance? If we focused on that, I guess it's maybe pretty good in Linux. I know it's not as good in Windows. But if we look at the chart that you showed earlier, where you have an $80 billion market in the enterprise data center, then the predominant way that I think InfiniBand would get consumed in that environment is sockets, right? That's the predominant API that people would be using, and working towards getting a better sockets performance. It doesn't have to be exactly on par with the Verbs APIs, but just make it as good as possible. I think getting that kind of experience out of the box helps people easily consume it.
That still implies that OFED is reliant on InfiniBand in that case, does it not?
In that case, yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Bob?
So I think the most important thing is something that is embedded in some of this, and is the perception in the community of those that might want to adopt it. And so I think we heard from Google and some other places where there are significant communities within corporations or places where the technology might go where they're very resistive. Oh, it's, InfiniBand, OFED, slash. We're not really familiar with that. We know that there are problems, or there could be problems, but this perception, and I think that gets back a lot to the knowledge of it, how it works, making that information more available to train, really expert people that are in the field that are at the end of this, that are going to be responsible to run systems based on it.
Thanks, Bob. One vote for better sockets performance, one vote for better perception in the community.
Quality.
Quality.
If you don't have the quality, then you ruin your reputation in a heartbeat and people move on.
Quality, in this case, you mean installations, bugs, no crashes?
Yeah, whatever you release, it must work, period.
Got to work. Go ahead, Scott.
So I'm going to agree with all of that, and I think...
you can't. You get only one.
Well, I'm going to drive the fundamental, what do we really need to push and work on, right, for the next 12 months, is actually getting the OEMs to step up to be the voice of open fabrics that say we are participating in the quality control, the interoperability, that this is a mature stack and it's good enough, and we're going to put our logo, the Open Fabrics or the OFED logo, right alongside with the OEM's logo. And that's not just the OEMs, but also system integrators and whatnot that says we do care about the quality, we do care about the robustness of the stack. And I think that is the one fundamental thing that we could do as Open Fabrics is to get this perception, the perception that yes, OFED is the way that you need to run your HPC cluster. It is the way that you need to move your enterprise data center. And I think we can best leverage that through the perception. And the only way to do that is to get the OEMs involved to actually make sure that we're clamping down on the quality, that we actually get the buy-in from the distros to include all of the pieces and components of Open Fabrics. And so I think that's fundamentally my stand on it. If that's any different or agreeing with you all, the other thing I think we need to really work on for next year is the venue for this conference.
So beyond the venue for the conference, we said we're going to improve the perception of the community, we're going to get better sockets performance, higher quality, and get the OEMs to step up. Do we have other questions from the audience?
question. What does he mean by OEM? That's a pretty...
The OEMs, the system integrators, right?
You mean system vendors, specifically cluster vendors?
Yeah, mostly the system vendors, right? I mean, you don't just go off and build, well, a lot of people, some people do, right? But for the most part, you're going to go out there, you're going to talk to Dell, and this is not true in the multi-10,000s of nodes, but not only HP, IBM, Dell, but then you have the super micros, right? And the people that are building these white boxes where you're going to go off and assemble your low-cost, commodity-based cluster, right? Open Fabric still needs to be perceived, and not only just perceived, but proven that, yeah, we've tried it, we tested it, we think it's important, and we know that it works. So, you know, it's not just the major OEMs, but it's also the ODMs and the white box system builders. And
I don't have the exact number right in front of me, but in our surveys, close to a third of systems are identified by the end user as generic or in-house systems without a named vendor attached to them. Which, you know, maybe there was a named vendor, but the person filling out the survey says, I don't know, we bought it from whoever.
Right.
Other questions? In that case, I'd like to thank everybody very much. Thank my panelists for stepping up to some hairy, forward-looking questions. It's going to be an interesting year for OFA going forward. I think you've bitten off a lot of juicy problems that you can sink your teeth into over the next 10 to 12 months. I hope I'll be able to attend the conference again next year myself. But to the organizers, thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it very much.